And I know I'm not alone. I think this nasty cold is just looking around and you guys are So here we are at the beginning of Advent. But to look around in here, you would think it's almost Christmas Eve. And not just in here, but out there. The Christmas music started playing in stores way before Thanksgiving, right? And the TV ads were queued up, I swear, at 7 a.m. the day after Halloween, they started. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I was shopping for the paper products and the decorations for our caroling event, that the stores were already marking down their Christmas stuff like I'd missed the season. And I turned to this woman in the aisle and said to her, "It isn't even December yet." And already it was like, clear it out, getting done, Christmas is over. I don't know why they were doing that. However, even though the world out there is telling us to hurry up and rush into Christmas, our Christian tradition teaches us to slow down and practice the discipline of waiting and preparing for the arrival of the Christ child. So this morning we lit just one candle of the 5 of our Advent wreath, and each week we'll just add one more until on Christmas Eve we finally light all 5. Though I do remember, not that long ago in another church I served, despite all of the advanced written instructions we provided, the Green family marched down the center aisle, because this was a church where lay people lit the Advent wreath, and they proceeded to light the whole thing up on the first Sunday of Advent. I think it just didn't seem right to them, particularly to the mom, that we would have this beautiful wreath sitting in front of everyone with all but one of the candles not lit up. So she did them all. The pastor and I were sitting next to each other. And then we had to decide, like, do we get up and put them out? Do we just leave? We just left it. It was not worth it. There's just something in our nature, I think, as human beings, that we don't want to wait. We don't like that uneasy feeling of something being unfinished, or the nervous anxiety of anticipation, or the way waiting for something makes that clock just slow down in such an unbearable way. And our ancestors, they were no different. Even before Christianity reached Northern Europe, our ancestors in the Northern Hemisphere would get anxious as winter came every year. And the days grew shorter and the nights grew longer. The air got colder and the ground froze harder. It felt to them, I think, that spring would never come again. The breezes would never be warm again. The ground would never yield crops for them to eat again. And the suffering of wintertime, it would just go on forever. So they developed rituals for reassuring themselves, reminding themselves that though the winter was bleak, spring would come again. Though all around them was frozen, branches were bare, there was barely a sign of life anywhere. They wanted a reminder that that old world, it was turning slowly, slowly back toward light and warmth that would bring green shoots up through the soil again. Buds to the branches, lambs and calves and foals to their fields and barns, and winter wasn't going to last forever. Now, one of the most important symbols that they used in these wintertime rituals was the evergreen tree, the one plant that defied winter's efforts to paint the landscape with bare branches and dead leaves and frozen fields, because it remained green all year round. As the old German song goes, how lovely are thy branches, not only green when summer's here, but also when 'tis cold and drear. That song, by the way, isn't about a Christmas tree, though when it got translated into English, it was. It's, "O fir tree, you greet us in the winter, the dear summertime." So at the winter solstice, which is the longest night of the year, the shortest day of the year, usually falls on December 21st, our European forebears would bring evergreen boughs, fir and spruce and pine branches inside, and they would hang them above their doorways and in their windows. When Christians finally did show up, they took the "if you can't beat them, join them" approach to evangelism, and they simply reframed these traditions and reinterpreted them. So rather than just a reminder that winter wouldn't last forever and life would return in spring, the first Christian missionaries to Northern Europe told their evergreen-loving converts that the branches they decorated their homes with at the winter solstice, those were a reminder that with God and Christ we're given the power to claim life even in the face of death and darkness. When evergreens are woven into a wreath, they started to teach them, like these wreaths here. It's a symbol of God being Alpha and Omega, having no beginning and no end, just like a circle, a sign of everlasting life. Now, those of us in New England should know that the Puritans in our family tree were not so accommodating. They rejected the adaptation of what they called pagan customs. The Pilgrim's second governor, William Bradford, wrote that he tried hard to stamp out pagan mockery of the observance of Christmas, penalizing any frivolity. He was a party animal, that guy. Don't forget, it was like a few years after that that the witch trial started. So, Oliver Cromwell, still back in England, preached against the heathen traditions of Christmas carols, of decorated trees, and any joyful expression that desecrated the sacred event. In 1659, the General Court of Massachusetts, which at that time included us here in Maine, enacted a law that made any observance of December 25th, other than a church service, which I'm sure was just a good time, a penal offense. You could be charged with a criminal offense if you celebrated December 25th. They were fined if they hung decorations in their homes. That stern solemnity actually continued on in America until the 1800s, when the influx of German and Irish immigrants began to soften that Puritan hard line. And speaking of Germans, it's Germany that is credited with starting the Christmas tree tradition as we know it today. In the 16th century, they started bringing decorated fir trees into their homes rather than just those branches. And what they think is that they saw these things called paradise plays, different than the Passion plays, paradise plays that told the biblical story of creation. And they had a decorated tree in the middle of the stage decorated with apples. And somebody got the idea that at Christmas time, which was not when these plays were going on, it would be nice to have a decorated tree for that too. And it's widely held, you Lutherans can hold your heads high this morning, Martin Luther was the first person to add lights to a Christmas tree, and not just decorations. As the legend goes, he was walking toward his home one winter evening, composing a sermon, of course, when he was awed by the brilliance of stars twinkling amidst the evergreen branches above his head. To recapture the scene for his family, he brought a tree inside and set it up and wired to its branches lighted candles. The practice of decorating Christmas trees did not travel across the Atlantic to here for almost 300 years, though. As late as the 1840s, most Americans still found Christmas trees an oddity and considered them a pagan symbol. The first time a Christmas tree was displayed here that we know of, the first record of it was 1740s, but it was Germans. The German Deutsch, or Dutch, Pennsylvania Dutch, which is really Deutsch for German. They would set up trees in their community square and decorate them. But what really turned the tide, and I'll be proud as a Brit now, was in 1846, when Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had a drawing done of them and their enormous family standing in front of a Christmas tree in their parlor. And because at that time, anything Queen Victoria and Prince Albert did was the height of fashion, upper class in Britain started doing it, and the East Coast Society in the US started doing it. If it was good enough for Victoria and Albert, it was good enough for us. And thus the Christmas tree arrived here. By the 1890s, you can see evidence that German ornaments were starting to be imported through the port of New York, and Christmas tree popularity was on the rise. Now in Europe, Christmas trees stood then about 4 feet high, but we're Americans. So very quickly, we said Christmas trees had to go from the floor to the ceiling. They needed to be huge. And in the early 20th century, we decorated them mostly with handmade ornaments, but German Americans were still using apples and nuts and marzipan cookies. Then came electricity and Christmas lights. And soon Christmas trees began appearing in town squares everywhere and in living rooms across America. I don't know about you, but I know that it wasn't that long ago that the debate was raging in Protestant churches about whether you could have a Christmas tree in church or not. Does anybody remember those fights? Ooh, we had them in my church in Michigan. Holy cow. Some people argued, believe it or not, still were saying that's a pagan symbol and it has no place in a Christian sanctuary. Others saw it as an intrusion of the commercialized aspect of Christmas, and for that reason would say that doesn't really belong in our church. A compromise was finally struck when someone offered the idea of decorating the church Christmas tree with something called chrismons. Christmas ornaments were first developed by a woman named Frances Kipps Spencer. Once again, you Lutherans can hold your heads high because she was a Lutheran. She attended Ascension Lutheran Church in Danville, Virginia. And in 1957, she started thinking about a way that she could decorate the Christmas tree in her church that would be suitable for a sanctuary. She thought traditional bright ornaments weren't appropriate, and so she wanted something that would reflect the Christian faith. She thought about decorating a birthday cake, she says, since it's Jesus' birthday, and we should put his name on his birthday cake. So the first chrismons were the initials, Chi Rho, for Christ. That's the Greek, anyway, of his monogram. And she made some crosses as well as some Chi Rho chrismons, and that's what decorated that first tree. And over the years, she added other designs that were other Christian symbols, like the fish. And they're almost always made in white and gold, and they're usually handmade out of paper or embroidery or beads. And I've noticed that here at Faith Lutheran, you have a collection of these. Do you know, I don't know where they came from or who made them. Marsha.
But I remember sewing them.
Making them? Yeah. I have some on my tree too. Yeah, they're beautiful. And we don't have them up today because we figured we did not need 2 Christmas trees. And this one was beautiful enough. But you do own these chrismons, and so at some point somebody learned about this movement that began in the 60s and brought it here. Now, I'll confess, I don't really have an issue with greens and fir trees decorating Christian worship space. I share the view of the 8th century Christian missionary to Germany, St. Boniface, who told his fir tree-loving congregation, "This little tree, a young child of the forest, shall be your holy tree tonight. It is the wood of peace, for your houses are built of it, and it is a sign of endless life, for its leaves are evergreen. See how it points straight to heaven. Let this be called the tree of the Christ child. Gather about it, not in the wild woods, but in your homes, and there it will shelter loving gifts and rites of kindness." I don't know whether he really said that or not. It shows up on Wikipedia. It must be true. But I do know that the attitude represented in that quote is the true attitude of faith. Because I don't think faith is about learning symbols that are sacred and truly represent God. Faith is looking at everything in a new way and seeing God everywhere you look. Faith is looking at your dining room table and seeing an altar spread with the love of God. Faith is looking at a dirty, smelly drunk and seeing in him the face of Christ and the beauty and the potential for transformation and restoration. Faith is receiving a hug from a friend and feeling the arms of God wrapped around you. Isn't that what Jesus did so often? Taught us not to see different things, but to see things differently. What did he choose as symbols for himself? Bread, wine, water. Nothing exclusive to any one group. Things that were common and fundamental to the experience of everyone. Basic food, a loaf of bread, a cup of wine, a bowl of water. The Christmas tree in the church is a reminder that our calling is not to be separated from the world, but simply to live in it and look at it differently. It's the same physical world out there as it is in here. This is just the place to see things differently. This is the place where drunks and drug addicts are seen as children of God. This is the place where death is seen as the beginning of life. Where giving is seen to be receiving. And where becoming a servant of others is proclaimed as the true foundation of leadership. This is the place where the common is seen as a miracle, and where ordinary people realize they are capable of the most extraordinary things. It's here that water becomes wine, and that wine becomes the life of Christ poured out for us. This is not the place to see different things. This is the place to see things differently. This is a place of transformation. Once a year, evergreen trees across the globe now are transformed. They sparkle with lights and they shelter gifts of love beneath their branches, and everybody understands it. Everyone has access to it. So it is with the God that we proclaim. God is the God of all. God is the light that shines in the darkness, and God shelters gifts of love beneath ever-living branches. The tree stands here, reminding us that our God transforms the ordinary. God takes the secular and makes it sacred. The meaningless suddenly has purpose. The aimless have vision, the blind see, the lame walk, and the dead are raised to new life. So this Advent, this Christmas, let's not come to Christ expecting to see different things. Let's come expecting to see things differently. May it be so.